I'm here today with Mike Harris. Mike is an award-winning journalist, over 40 years experience with the Associated Press, retired, nearly 5 decades experience in journalism. And he's going to share with us some of his experiences with journalism and specifically sports writing.
What is journalism right now? It's changing almost every day. There's a lot of emphasis on social media and electronic or new journalism. That's totally different from when I started out, where we were almost totally involved in the print media. So there's good things and bad things about it. Some of the bad things about social media and electronic journalism are that there aren't many breaks on it. You know, people can pretty much say or do what they want to do, and that's not always a good thing. But on the other hand, it has made the whole world of journalism faster and in some cases more interesting, especially nowadays when people don't have the time or the interest to read long stories or to spend a lot of time over a newspaper. You can go on your computer or whatever it is that you're using, your smartphone, and read whatever you want to read. But it's put different emphasis on the journalists, on the people covering the stories, because it's immediate. You have to get it out right now, and sometimes that means you're not checking things as thoroughly as you might want to do. So it puts a lot of pressure on the writer, on the reporter. And I think that that's one of the biggest changes in journalism, is that you really have no time to sit and think about what you're writing in many cases. That's not always a good thing. So it means that reporters have a lot of responsibility. They have to really work hard to figure out what it is they're going to get out there and try to make it as honest and straightforward as possible and not mislead the public. If you're going to get into it today, you have to pretty much be aware that you're going to be heavily involved in social journalism and electronic journalism. It's just part of the business today. In this day and age, that multitasking is very important, and it's probably the biggest change in journalism, because when I was first in it, there was no such thing as multitasking. You went, you covered a story, you wrote the story, you did what you had to do, and you were done. Nowadays, that's not true. You write before you cover the story, you write during the time you're covering the story, and then you write after you cover the story. So it's tweeting, and it's blogging, and it's writing the actual print story. By the time I got to high school, I pretty much knew that I wanted to write sports, because I always loved sports. I mean, that was my passion. I played every sport you can imagine, and wasn't very good, but I just enjoyed it. And my dad was a big sports fan and had been a good athlete, and took us to a lot of sporting events. I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, went to University of Wisconsin sports events constantly: basketball, football, baseball, hockey, even boxing in those days, and loved it very much. And that was my passion, and that's what I knew, so that's what I wanted to do. Now, when I got into the profession, interestingly enough, I couldn't go straight into sports writing. And in both cases of jobs I took, I had to start on the news side, because there were no openings in sports, and they needed somebody who was a little bit more knowledgeable, experienced for the sports slots. But I worked my way into it eventually, and spent 44 years writing sports, and loved it. I loved pretty much every minute of it. So it was a lot of fun and a lot of hard work, and I met a lot of interesting people. The people in sports are fabulous to cover. I mean, there are people that aren't very nice, and there are people who are great, and just like any other part of life. But during my career, which spanned almost 5 decades, I met just about everybody famous in sports. And some of them I liked, some of them I didn't like, some of them I got along with, some of them I didn't get along with. But some of the things that I did during that time, some of my favorite things were when I was working in Indianapolis, I covered the Notre Dame basketball team. And this was the time back in the 70s when UCLA had an 88-game winning streak. And they came into South Bend playing the Notre Dame basketball team, and Notre Dame beat them on a last-second shot by a guy by the name of Gary Brokaw. And I wound up actually filing my story by telephone, dictating my story, sitting under the press table because the students had rushed the floor and were grabbing everything in sight, everybody's notes and books and everything else. I grabbed my telephone and went underneath the table and sent my story in and got it done. So that was exciting. Some of the more difficult things I did was, unfortunately, and if you cover auto racing for a number of years, which I did, you're going to have to deal with the bad things, with deaths in the sport. One of the worst was when Dale Earnhardt, who was the biggest star in NASCAR, was killed in the 2001 Daytona 500. And it was a very hard thing because I knew Dale quite well. I'd had lunch with him 2 days earlier, and it was very hard to write that story, but you have to disassociate yourself from the person, and you have to actually just sit down and be very professional and do it. And I wrote that story, and I wrote a number of what we call leads, in other words, new tops to the story over a period of hours. I wound up not leaving the press box that day until 3 a.m. The race had ended about 4:30, and I wound up winning a major award for my writing. 2 major awards for my writing. I wound up as winning the Associated Press News Story of the Year for the Dale Earnhardt death story, and I also was given an award for the best news writing of the year. So, you know, they say that tragedy brings out the best in a good writer, and in this case, I think it did bring out the best in me, although I was very sad while I was doing it and actually had tears in my eyes quite a bit of the time. But it was something. It's how you learn your craft. You have to learn how to do the difficult things as well as the fun things. So, if you are going to have a career in journalism, you're going to have to deal with these things.